Hello, my AP US history students. I hope everybody is doing well and feeling fine. Thought it would be nice to record a little review video for your quiz tomorrow, just so everyone is on the same page. In case some people were out or, if they missed some stuff or they're confused, thought this video might help you. So starting overall with Unit 6, our big thesis of Unit 6, the thing we are trying to prove, the thing that we are going to provide evidence for is this simple sentence: the rise of big business, capitalism, and its relationship with the federal government and the people that work for it. So basically, our whole unit as a main idea can be summarized by that. How did big business get to the monopolies that they have today? And then how did those businesses interact with government? At first, during Unit 6, they interact by pretty much leaving government alone and defending them when it comes to unions. We'll get there. And it's workers. And in this unit, obviously, workers are organizing and hosting protests in unions against their factory owners. We'll give you specific pieces of evidence for that here in a minute. But anyways, Unit 6 starts out with the Wild West. We can see many Americans are continuing to move west in this time period. We see that there are major changes to agriculture with more technology, allowing for more efficient agriculture. Really, the breadbasket of America in the Midwest starts in this time period. We now have more efficient farming than we'd ever have. Because farming is becoming more efficient, it's more difficult for poor farmers to sustain themselves. It's easier for big businesses to rise up, which is exactly what happens in agricultural business, or the birth of big agra, right? So big agricultural business stems from the fact that farming is getting more efficient, and it becomes more difficult to be like an individual farmer. A lot of these poor farmers, the individual ones, do band together to try to help themselves out by lowering like shipping rates, specifically on the railroads, so they can take their crops on the railroads and move them to wherever they're going to sell them. They're called the Grangers. The Grangers are a group of poor farmers working together to attack the high shipping prices on railroads. Why such high prices? Well, the railroads are a monopoly, as you're going to see. Right. So the government does step in and try to encourage people to move out west. They passed the Homestead Act. The Homestead Act gives free land to anybody who works to improve that land. The government also steps in by creating the railroads, like the Pacific Railroads and the Transcontinental Railroad, to allow for easier migration westward. So, offering free land and easier transportation does send people to the west, which leads to things like boom towns. People that are in search of gold or silver, or people that are in search of oil. Basically, if you're a town, you're going to centralize yourself around a railroad. So these towns become known as boom towns. It's also where you'll find like cowboys, because all cowboys are basically ranchers. What they're doing is taking their cattle and getting them down to the railroad trailheads, so they can load the cattle onto the railroads and ship them to wherever they're shipping them to. We talked a little bit about this, how barbed wire is actually a pretty important part of American history. Barbed wire allows, not only farmers to keep animals out of their crops, but it does block off sections of the Midwest, making it more and more difficult for cowboys to have like cattle drives, and making it more difficult for the Native Americans, which is also a big focus of Unit 6, is the continued mistreatment of natives. Essentially, as white America continues to colonize the Midwest and move further west, violence occurs with Native Americans, as well as taking of their land, specifically through the Homestead Act. Native Americans are going to rebel against this. They're also going to rebel against the reservation system, which is created in the Dawes Act. Native Americans are looking to protect their culture. They do this through ghost dancing, where essentially they're offering prayers to, the Great Spirit to hopefully get back to their original ways and bring the buffalo back, which had declined significantly in population. You also have violent Native American reactions. We see this with the Sioux Native Americans. We also see this with the Navajo, another group of Native Americans that resist American colonization quite a bit. And then the two major events there are Custer's Last Stand, where we see General George Custer very foolishly, seeking out for personal glory, get into some fights with the Native Americans. Him and his people get massacred, which leads to even harsher treatment of the natives until we get the Battle of Wounded Knee, where the Native Americans are going to be defeated with their leaders such as Crazy Horse and Sitting Bull. for the final time for like an organized, violent rebellion by natives against white America. They're sort of put down and forced onto the reservations afterwards. This whole Wild West idea ends with Frederick Jackson Turner and his frontier thesis. Basically, Frederick Jackson Turner said that having the frontier developed American culture, American economics, and American identity. This idea that you could restart, that you could like move out west and strike it rich. That basically, the West had been the backup plan for America, and this idea of like going out and making it by yourself and like rugged individualism, and you don't need the government to be successful and all this stuff. He says is going to end because of the closing of the frontier. However, we know that Jackson Turner's thesis is incorrect because America does continue to grow economically, socially, and politically, even without a frontier. I guess you could argue that like space is now our frontier to expand into, but not like the government's funding NASA too much. That was a joke. Anyways, other ideas we have is the changing economy. So the economy is going to change pretty drastically, specifically for the South and what's known as the New South. Now that slaves are free, the Southern plantation owners can no longer rely on forced labor to generate their revenue. So the South needs to industrialize, which they do throughout Unit 6's time period. They become developing factories, developing industry to modernize the Southern economy, which is the whole point of the New South. However, they are trying to keep the black population out of their new economy. We saw that with the quote in the slides and also with Booker T. Washington, who I will talk about in a minute, right? The other form of economics that's really rising up in this time period is free enterprise or laissez-faire economics, or what I call pure capitalism. Again, capitalism is that the market and competition dictates how much things cost, dictates the winners and losers, if you will, the haves and have-nots. And at first, throughout the Unit 6 time period, the government is going to allow capitalism to exist uninhibited. It's going to allow itself to develop to its purest form without government interference. We have the Andrew Carnegie becoming our robber barons, our monopoly owners. Andrew Carnegie owning U.S. Steel. John D. Rockefeller owning Standard Oil. Cornelius Vanderbilt owning the railroads. And J.P. Morgan owning banking, right? All of those groups, those tycoons of industry, those captains of industry are monopoly owners that took the advantage of the system of vertical integration and horizontal integration to develop their businesses, and a lack of government interference to develop their businesses to the point where they have no competition. Or vertical integration is simply when you control all the means of production. So like you control the oil on the oil field all the way to like people buying gasoline, and horizontal integration where you own all the methods of distribution. So not only do you own all the stuff to get to gasoline, but you own all the things that distribute gasoline as well. You don't own all the gas stations. So that's how basically, without government interference, monopolies are allowed to grow to their heights, where you have people that are incredibly, incredibly wealthy. There are some justifications for being this rich. The one we read in class is the Gospel of Wealth. In the Gospel of Wealth, Andrew Carnegie argues that rich people should be this rich to then give money back in services to the poor people. So that's universities, that's libraries. He didn't believe in directly giving people money. That's much more social capitalism. But he did believe in donating things to the poor to help improve their lives, which is one of the justifications of why it's okay these guys are so rich, at least their own argument. Obviously, we now get to the point where labor unions get involved. So this would be the government, an example of the government of business interacting with its workers. You have the Knights of Labor rise up, the American Federation of Labor rise up. Union membership skyrockets throughout the time period. Industries are going to try to shut down unions through a whole bunch of different methods, like dividing and conquering. So you have different people of different ethnic groups working in the same shift so they don't talk. Blacklisting people, union leaders, so they can't get jobs. Yellow contracts, which are going to say that you can't join a union if you sign on to, do whatever job this is. So we have labor and unions uprising to combat big business. They are at first not supported by the government. The government actually supports big business. And this is a quiz question. If you made it this far in the video, you get a free quiz question. Now, one of the questions is, give me an example of how the federal government supported big business in the time period. You would say something like the National Railroad Strike, which is put down by the president. Rutherford B. Hayes sends troops in to put it down. The Haymarket Square riot, or the Pullman strike, where police officers are going to murder union members that are on strike to try to get them to go back to work. We went through a series of political cartoons where essentially if you see anybody that is heavy, has the money bags to make it look like they have more weight, they're representing like the wealthy people. The only last couple things that we covered in the last couple days of class that's eligible for your quiz is Plessy versus Ferguson, which is a Supreme Court case that says that segregation is legal in the United States. You can have separate but equal facilities. We know that's not going to go well because obviously one group is going to get the massive advantage in terms of their libraries and their bathrooms and their schools and such. And the other thing we covered was Booker T. Washington's Atlanta exposition, in which Booker T. Washington says, "Cast down your bucket here." Basically, he's talking about the relationship between immigrants and Black America, where basically immigrants are moving into the country because of things like the Irish potato famine and German unification that are taking up jobs in factories. Booker T. Washington argues that if you're going to have equality for white and black America, you need economic equality and you need to cast down your bucket where it is. So the 8 million slaves that already exist on the North American continent should be where factory owners are looking for labor that they can pay. However, they are turning more towards immigrants. But Booker T argues that we need to have economic equality, and you should be investing in the black population. As much as he even says it will continue to make black America subservient to white America, it's when you get economic equalities when you can finally actually have respect, right? Anyways, that's all the topics that are eligible for your quiz. Let me know if you have any questions, and if you stuck through there, you got a couple free quiz questions. Hope you have a good night. Let me know if you need anything.